What is family law? Family law is also known as domestic relations. The first thing we need to understand about family law or domestic relations is it's basically a matter of state law. There's very little federal law involved except when it comes to tax and perhaps pension areas. So most of family law is going to be a matter of state law. And family law is, the way I look at it, it's all about relationships. And there's two main relationships that we're talking about: the marriage relationship and the parent-child relationship. And as we look at those relationships, in family law, we are concerned with how those relationships are created. Once they're created, during the duration of their being, what are the rights of the parties involved? And then thirdly, is the relationship that we're talking about, either the marriage relationship or the parent-child relationship, how is it terminated, if it ever is terminated? So that's what family law, that's just an overview of an outline. And this is family law right here. So let's look a little bit further at each one of these components. Starting with the marriage relationship. Now, how is the marriage relationship created? In Texas and many other states, there are basically two ways it's created, either formally or with sometimes called ceremonial marriage. And that's where there is a license that is required. And then also, as I said, in Texas and some other states, we have something called an informal marriage, or what a lot of people call common law marriage. Some states don't recognize that. It can't be created there. But in other states, it is created. So that is a subject of litigation sometimes, whether or not there is even a marriage, when there hasn't been a formal or ceremony involved, a formal marriage with a ceremony and a license. In some jurisdictions, you still may have a marriage, and so sometimes there's litigation over that. Now, there's also an issue of, is this marriage, even if it has come into being, maybe even through a ceremony or formally, is it a void marriage or is it voidable? And there you're talking about, with this voidable, this notion down here of annulment, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, but this notion of, is it void marriage? Because there are going to be some relationships that you just cannot create a marriage. When I say relationship, there is already a marriage in place. And if that's so, then that subsequent attempt to have a marriage is going to be void. And there are some family relationships that exist that by state law prohibit the creation of a marriage relationship. Like you can't create a marriage relationship with your parent or your child or an ancestor of any kind or a descendant of any kind. You cannot create a marriage relationship with the sibling of a parent, that'd be an aunt or uncle, and so forth. So those types of relationships are going to be void, so there is no marriage. And then we have a number of situations where the parties would say, we are legally married, we were legally married, but I want to erase that. I want to make it to where it never happened. Now, that's not the same thing as a divorce. What we're talking about is an annulment. And those situations are going to be what we call voidable marriages, where someone didn't have capacity when they actually consented to the marriage. They were intoxicated, perhaps, would be one example. Or they were underage, and now that person or the person's parents are coming to annul the marriage. Okay. What about once you have a marriage going? What are the rights and obligations of the parties? That's involved with family law. What are the property rights that the parties have? What debt, what liability for debts do the parties have for the debts of each other or the debts that they create together? In some states where when we're talking about community property versus separate property, there's a handful of states, about 8 states or so, primarily in the southwestern part of the United States, that follow this community property system of marital property. And so that has a whole set of issues that go with that. Upon divorce, how are we going to divide the property? So those are some of the property issues involved. And not to mention, before a marriage, the parties perhaps may want to enter into a premarital agreement or a prenuptial agreement to decide what's going to happen with their property in the event of divorce or perhaps death or something like that. It's basically a contract between the parties, and it can override what state law might otherwise provide. Okay, and then how do we terminate the marriage relationship? Well, death will do it, obviously, and but also divorce, and that's how we terminate marriage. Now, I've got annulment here, and I've already talked about annulment, but annulment, you're really not terminating a marriage the way I look at it. You're saying annulment's a time machine. You're going back in time and saying, it never happened. But if you want to say that's one way we terminate the marriage relationship or make it go away, well, we'll add that to the list. But annulment is basically saying this marriage relationship never did exist because it was voidable. It never existed. And that's why some people get confused with the difference between divorce and annulment. Divorce, it actually did happen and you don't want that relationship anymore, and so you're going to terminate it. Annulment, you're proving to the court that, well, it actually did not ever happen or shouldn't be stated legally that it ever did. And so it's, like I said, it's like an eraser, and you're saying it never happened, or it's a time machine. You're going back in time saying it did not happen. The second relationship is the parent-child relationship. And once again, we're looking at how is it created, what are the rights and obligations of the parties, and then how is it terminated. So, how is it created? Issues that are involved there are, of course, paternity. And when we're talking about paternity, establishing whether or not that parent-child relationship, which is a legal relationship, whether or not it exists, the law in all the states depend heavily on presumptions. And a presumption would be taking a fact. If you take a particular fact or set of circumstances as being true, then other things are also true or taken as true. So a child, an example would be a child born during the marriage of a man and a woman. The presumption is that the man is the presumed biological father of the child and thus would be the parent of the child, and parent would be the legal relationship. And there are a number of different presumptions like that that will exist in the state laws of various states. If you have no such presumption to establish that this is presumptively the parent, then you go with a suit to establish paternity, a paternity action, a paternity suit. And then, of course, we create the parent-child relationship through adoption as well. So that's how we create the relationship. Once we have the relationship created, what are the obligations and rights of the parties? Well, the parents have a bunch of statutory rights. The right of physical possession, care, control, discipline, support, to clothe the child, shelter, or even a right to the earnings of the child, the right to consent to marriage or medical treatment. So those are just some examples, and those lists, these rights are listed in statutes of all the states. And then how do we terminate? Well, then a suit to terminate that relationship would be the way you would actually terminate that. You'd have to file a lawsuit, show that the grounds exist for termination of the suit according to the state law in effect, and then convince the judge to sign the court order. And so that's how you would terminate the suit, to terminate the parent-child relationship. Basically make that, what would be a parent, a legal stranger to the child. But the overriding issue in all of these is what is in the best interest of the child. That's the overriding issue and principle in making decisions on everything regarding the parent-child relationship. There are going to be some other issues, related matters and issues that we would call family law. First of these would be enforcement orders. The enforcement of orders, such as child support. The judge makes a child support order and someone doesn't pay their child support, you have to go in and ask the judge to hold that person accountable through contempt power or some other mechanisms that may be available under state law. That applies to visitation and even property division on a divorce when someone doesn't deliver or doesn't deliver property that's to be turned over to the other party. Modification of orders. Someone wants to raise child support, lower child support, change the visitation, or even challenge and change custody. All of that would be modifying orders that are in place, and that's considered part of the family law. Name change of a minor, that might be involved, and so potentially that could come under the umbrella of family law. Removal of minority status. A minor saying, I'm mature enough to take care of myself and make my own decisions. Even though I am under 18, I ask the court to let me do those things on my own behalf. So that would be a matter of family law. And something I don't have up here, but in some jurisdictions, even juvenile law. Juvenile delinquency and children in need of supervision would also be a related matter in family law. And then finally, family law is a very broad subject, touches on many areas of the law, such as litigation. You're going to litigate, you're going to be in the courtroom, you're going to be dealing with evidence. Property law, real property, personal property, titles, title documents, deeds, liens on property. Business organizations, if in a divorce, the family owns, or one of the partners in the marriage owns a business, and it may be part of the marital estate, part of the marital property, we're going to be involved with business organization law. Tax law, you can't get away from tax law. And so that could have a huge impact in how we handle a family law matter. And then basically, it really comes down to virtually any area of law you could end up dealing with in a family law case. And so that's an overview of family law.